You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.
Hello, everyone. This is Rosalind Sadaka, and you're listening to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. The show, of course, is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sadaka, and you know that I'm the founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, and we talk about issues that are of importance to people before, during, and long after divorce, and in dating after divorce, and in living an empowered life. And we have wonderful topics every week and wonderful guests, and this week is no exception. I'm very honored to be introducing you to Dr. Linda Olson. And Dr. Olson is a licensed clinical psychologist and psychotherapist who's been working for over 30 years in the area of childhood domestic violence, which is about children who grow up living with domestic violence and domestic abuse and trauma. So this is a very serious show today, and I want you to listen even if you're not experiencing that in your own life, because we never know when we're going to meet someone who has been experiencing that and can use the advice and suggestions that Dr. Olson will be providing for us. So we're going to be talking about some of the lesser known and least addressed childhood adversity issues that are related to what's called CDV, childhood domestic violence. First, let me welcome Dr. Linda Olson.
Thank you, Rosalind. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and an honor as well. Thank you for inviting me to be on the show.
This is a very important topic, and what most people don't realize when they think about domestic violence is that they think about women and violence and abuse and pain for women. But most people don't typically think about the children who are growing up in these homes who are exposed to domestic violence and the profound impact it has on their lives and on their hopes and aspirations for the future. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And we want to really emphasize that UNICEF calls it one of the most pervasive human issues of our time. So this is a very serious issue when children are growing up witnessing domestic violence, whether it's physical or non-physical. How is it emotionally and psychologically impacting those children? And that's what we're going to talk about. So thank you for bringing your wisdom to our show. I am so grateful.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
So let's start.
And you're absolutely right. I guess, I'm sorry, I just want to reiterate, you're absolutely right. I think what's really key is when most people think of domestic violence, they think of the women, violence, abuse, and pain, but they don't think of the children who are growing up witnessing the violence between parents or between a parent and a step-parent, which has a profound impact on a child for the rest of their lives. And as you pointed out earlier, it's one of the least known and least addressed, most unknown childhood adversity, which has, we'll talk about later, the huge impact it has on children throughout the lifespan.
Yes, and I am so glad that we are finally bringing this to light, because I, too, failed to give as much credence to thinking about the impact on the children. And so I'm going to start with the obvious question, and that what is the impact on children who are growing up with childhood domestic violence exposure?
Well, number one, and this is really, really important, it's the single best predictor of becoming a perpetrator or victim of domestic violence later in life, is whether or not you grew up witnessing violence. I mean, think about that for a moment. Most people know the impact of childhood physical abuse, sexual abuse, incarceration, mental illness. However, there's less than 15% awareness of the single biggest predictor, that being children who grow up in homes witnessing the violence between parents or caregivers. It's the single biggest predictor to them becoming a perpetrator or victim of domestic violence later in life. And this is a huge, huge missing piece, particularly since what we're seeing now in this country, which is really a public health crisis.
Totally. And it's so important to be talking about this now because of I am sure that many of these killers who are doing these mass shootings and other abuses in our culture have been children of domestic violence, and we haven't been putting the pieces together in really putting focus on that. So thanks for sharing what you are sharing with us and giving us some insights about this.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, Rosalind, that many of the children, many of these mass shooters grew up witnessing domestic violence in the home, and that's often not even talked about. In many of the cases, including the Adam Lanza case with the divorce and the San Bernardino case, and there's a real there's a correlation. As I said, it's the biggest predictor to becoming a perpetrator or victim. There's a strong correlation, and people need to know that this is the single biggest predictor. It's a huge red flag that's being missed, and it's not being talked about or addressed.
Well, thank God we are at least starting to have that conversation. So I understand that there are common, universal, internalized false beliefs that these children have because they've been exposed to what's called CDV, childhood domestic violence. Can you talk about some of these universal, internalized false beliefs that these children are carrying?
Absolutely. And then I want to come back and talk about the statistics, too, the question that you asked me earlier. But you're absolutely right that a child, you have to keep in mind, a child that is growing up living in a home witnessing violence is growing up living in constant fear. And as you know, the brain isn't even developed till age 25. So you're dealing with a young brain that's actually being rewired because they're in a constant state of either hyperarousal or hypoarousal. You know, growing up in constant fear, it's like growing up in a war zone. So it's certainly not uncommon that they're going to feel extreme amount of fear, uncertain, timid, lacking confidence inside. The other thing that I really want to point out to your audience, the viewers, is that kids oftentimes feel a strong sense of guilt. They blame themselves for things that have nothing to do with them. And that's how the child's brain works. They blame themselves because of the cognitive capabilities. In addition to the 10 internalized false beliefs, they're oftentimes really angry, in a constant state of frustration, and there's no one to talk to, there's no outlet. They often feel hopeless, like life has no purpose, nothing ever works out. A tremendous feeling of sadness, a feeling of loss, because in fact they are losing their childhood. Of course they're going to feel a sense of loss. They literally are not able to be experiencing a healthy childhood because of living in a constant fear and unpredictability. So there's a lot of resentment, which again is unresolved anger. The next one is feeling worthless, unimportant, not good enough, a failure. This relates a lot to the self-blame, like it must be my fault. I must be the cause of this. That's the way the young brain works, again, because of the age of the brain and the the lack of brain development. And I think one of the most significant things and the most devastating things, and this really relates to the mass shooters as well, a tremendous sense of feeling alone. They're not connected to others. They feel really isolated because, again, nobody's talking about it. And obviously there's a lot of shame. It's not like a child is going to bring this up because they're very fearful. I don't want to lose mom and dad. I don't want to have either of them go to prison. And so they're going to protect and stay silent, which perpetuates it. There's no place to talk about it. The other two internalized beliefs, usually they feel a tremendous sense of I'm not good enough and very unlovable. Because the truth is, if you're growing up living in constant fear and you don't have a sense of security and your parents are not available, how can you possibly feel loved? You can't. You can't.
So you're feeling totally alone and unsupported in the world. You're feeling totally helpless. You have no outlets for support or help. You're trying to fix things yourself because that's all you possibly think you can do. And, of course, as a child, there's no way you could fix these adult problems. And on top of it all, you're feeling guilty because on some level you must be to blame for this. If only you were a better kid, if only you got better grades in school, maybe mom and dad wouldn't be fighting this way. And so all of that combines together into a child that is just riddled with fear and anger and anxiety and helplessness. It's amazing that they even can survive such a situation, and they're ready to explode, and there's no way to go and there's no outlet to help them unless someone comes in from the outside with a support system.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's what's so tragic is that they're not even being asked, so what is it like at home? Mm-hmm. So there's no opportunity for them to share what's going on because of the shame, the lack of resources, the lack of support, and frankly, the lack of awareness. The lack of awareness in this country that this is the missing link. This is the missing piece of the puzzle that we have got to address if we are going to help our children and save lives and really make a huge difference in the impact of these children, because we know how to help these kids. We have the research. We need to be talking about it. It needs to become part of the zeitgeist. It needs to be common knowledge that these kids are set up, they're programmed to become perpetrators or victims. It's like the perfect storm. Mm-hmm. Certainly when you include divorce, when you include CDV, the child of domestic violence, and any genetic predisposition to depression, anxiety, isolation, lack of friends, isolation, the internet. It's like the perfect storm.
Yeah. So I hear the passion in your voice. As I am so passionate about child-centered divorce, I hear the passion you have for this topic. Can you tell us a little bit about your own personal story and why this is so important for you to help families with?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for asking me. I grew up with CDV. I'm the oldest of 6, and I grew up witnessing childhood domestic violence and perpetuated the pattern in my own marriage. It took me 22 years to finally realize and have the courage to leave and have to know the impact it had on my 3 sons. 30 or 40 years ago, we had no idea what the impact was on kids. Mm-hmm. We always believed, I certainly believed, it was better to keep the family together at all costs. Well, I was completely wrong. That is not true. It's much better for the kids to be be modeling a healthy relationship. In addition, unfortunately and tragically, I lost two of my younger sisters, one who was stalked, shot, and killed by an ex-boyfriend in a dating relationship.
Wow.
And another younger sister who was in and out of abusive relationships and died homeless. So I am passionate. It's a calling. My life purpose, if you will, is to raise awareness around the impact of this hidden, unaddressed childhood adversity, so that people understand the consequences in memory of my two sisters. And for my clients, I specialize in it. I see clients every day, men, women, couples, and families, and I've been there. I'm blessed, truthfully, to be able to use a tragedy and turn it into a way to really help people, because I have been there and I know what it's like to grow up living in constant fear and to feel so hopeless and alone and like nobody cares or like nobody understands.
Yes. So this is not academic or hypothetical for you. This is real life, and that's why your clients get so much caring support, because you know what they're going through.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have to say there's no substitute for going through something yourself.
Mm-hmm.
As you well know, you've been there too. And my patients can feel it. They can feel it because I've been through it.
Yes.
It's hard to take somebody to the wall if you haven't been there yourself.
Exactly. Well, we're going to take a brief break and then get back. We've been talking to Dr. Linda Olson, who specializes in childhood domestic violence issues, and this is such an important conversation that we're having. So hang in. We'll be back in just one moment. Hello, everyone. We're back. This is Rosalind Sadaka with Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And we're talking with Dr. Linda Olson about childhood domestic violence and all the all the repercussions of what happens in a family when this is part of the family structure. So, Dr. Olson, can we talk a little bit about the biological and the neurological and the psychological effects in a little more clarity for us?
Yes, especially around the statistics, because as you mentioned earlier, I wanted to
do mention that.
Yes, okay. UNICEF calls it one of the most pervasive human rights challenges of our time, and a rough estimate suggests that as many as 1 billion lives are impacted globally, okay? According to UNICEF, that's 275 million children are currently impacted by CDV. An estimated 15 million children experience CDV in the U.S. alone, and many are also, and this is a key factor too, directly physically abused themselves. So they have two huge childhood adversities, growing up witnessing it, and then oftentimes, but not always, they're physically abused as well. So in addition to the statistics, an estimated 40 million adult Americans grew up in homes like this. That's 1 in 7, Rosalind, and that's probably a low statistic. That's a low statistic. And most importantly, when these kids grow up, they're 6 times more likely to commit suicide, 50 times more likely to abuse drugs or alcohol, 74 times more likely to commit a violent crime, which is devastating. Oftentimes in my office, people will say to me, Dr. Olson, how come nobody ever explained this to me? In fact, many of my colleagues who work with offenders, the males also say the same thing. Why was I not taught this? Well, certainly 20, 30 years ago, we didn't know what the impact was. Now we really know how it impacts the brain, literally rewires the brain. Rewires the brain, changes the brain's neuroplasticity. However, the good news is this. This is the really good news. We can rewire a person's brain. It's never too late. There's always hope. And that's really, really important for people to know, because without hope, I think that's probably one of the key ingredients for growth and healing. There is hope. We know now how to rewire the brain. There are so many great trauma programs, trauma researchers, that it's all evidence-based practice. I certainly include that in my own practice, using the mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy and then the dialectical behavior therapy, which is phenomenal. I always tell people I can't do it for you, but I can do it with you. You can learn these skills. You can unlearn these internalized false beliefs that they learned in childhood.
And that's the key. That's a huge part of it.
Absolutely. That's huge, because you can unlearn it, literally through rewiring the brain, which requires a lot of support and a commitment. So it's not in any way, there's a real silver lining in this. I think the silver lining is, and I will tell you unequivocally, kids that grow up with CDD, they have an amazing opportunity to turn that fear into becoming incredibly confident, because they really know what feels like, and they know how to face it. When you look at the other feeling guilty, feeling that constant self-blame, that guilt, that false, unjustified sense of guilt, once they can turn that into freedom, and they understand that a child is never responsible for the actions of an adult, it's so liberating. It's incredibly liberating and empowering. And certainly going through the other list that I talked about earlier in terms of internalized false beliefs, the ability, anger is a normal emotion, okay? It's a normal emotion. And to turn that anger and take control of that energy from anger and point it towards your passion is an incredible gift. It's an incredible gift.
Totally agree. Dr. Olson, do you also work directly with the children or just with the parents?
I work with both. Wonderful.
Both.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us how people can find you. I don't want to wait till the very end, because I want to make sure we get that information across.
Okay, well, they can find me at drlindaolson.com. That's DRLINDA. Olson is OLSON.com. And they can also find a way, if they're interested, and I would love the support to help children who grew up witnessing domestic violence or lost a loved one, to show that they care and show someone who they love, to donate to the nonprofit that I developed in memory of my two sisters, which is called ProjectHopeBear.org. ProjectHopeBear.org is a study group program. We're developing a therapeutic tool to help children regulate their negative emotions through listening to the bear's heartbeat and learn to self-soothe. Because we've got to teach these children at an early age how to self-soothe and self-regulate these emotions that we know exist, and yet teach them that it's absolutely normal, validate them, and listen to them.
Sounds like it's definitely a very important step, and I'm so glad that you are available to be accessed by people. In the time we have left, let's talk a little bit more about some of the solutions and the part that resiliency plays in all of this.
Okay, absolutely. Well, as I said before, there's tremendous hope because resiliency is the ability to really change adversity into something positive. And one of the key factors of resiliency, it only takes one person. So everybody listening out there, it takes one person to ask the question, did you grow up witnessing violence in your home? Tell me about it. To begin to ask the question. We can't find the answer if we don't ask the question.
So that means police authorities, school authorities, after-school professionals. We need to get our culture to be asking this question anytime someone who appears disturbed in some way, so that we could at least flag these people early on and get them into helpful programs. Is that right?
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Rosalind. It's imperative. It's critical because, as I said, it's a huge red flag that's being missed. And these kids oftentimes, the statistics are horrendous. 6 times more likely to commit suicide and oftentimes end up in jail. Many of the perpetrators in our jails grew up with CDD. In fact, I'm really excited that I'm going to start with a wonderful colleague, African-American gentleman, we're going to be co-leading adult survivor groups, male and female, adult children who grew up with CDD, adult survivor groups, starting in September, and we're going to start doing research. I'm the founder of the Childhood Domestic Violence Association, and we partnered with GSU, Georgia State University, and my wonderful colleague, Dr. Dubé, Shanta Dubé, is now the president, and she is one of the leading pioneers in the ACE study. The ACE study, which I'm sure you know, was the gold standard for looking at adverse child experiences. And Dr. Dubé was one of the leading pioneers and is doing research in this. So I'm really excited that we're going to be starting a group and doing research on a group with the male and female, with 2 co-leaders, a male and female, and we'll be doing, he does the male group, he'll be doing male groups, and we have other clinicians on our board who will be doing the female groups.
Wow, that is wonderful to know.
Yeah.
So are you able to go ahead?
It's really exciting, and I want to just say the groundwork, the person that laid the groundwork on this topic is Brian Martin. He is the founder of the Childhood Domestic Violence Association, which is based in New York. You can go to cdv.org. I'm on the board, and you can learn about all the tools, the toolkits that are available, or you could start by reading or telling someone you know, read the book Invincible. It's called Invincible by Brian Martin. It's the 10 lies you learned growing up with domestic violence and the truth to set you free. It's a wonderful book, and it's actually the first book that was written to survivors who witnessed domestic violence between parents. Tony Robbins wrote the foreword, and he himself grew up with CDD and talks about it.
Really?
And they can go there. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a wonderful book. My patients, I always warn my clients, I go, okay, this is what I recommend, and it's going to be a tough read. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just take it one step at a time. Even if you read 1 page a day, that's okay. It's also available on Audible or on audio, and they find it. I will tell you, 100% of my patients say, even if they didn't grow up witnessing it, they knew somebody who did, and it gives them tremendous insight and understanding into that person versus judgment. They will say, oh my gosh, that is unbelievable. That book changed my life. And I will tell you truthfully, 6-7 years ago, the first time I read Invincible, because it just came out in 2014, it was amazing because, as I said, it was the first book that's really written to the adult survivor, for anyone who grew up living with domestic violence or anyone who cares about someone who did.
Wonderful. So give us your website again so people can find you. And then I have a final question to ask you.
Okay. It's drlindaolson.com. So it's drlindaolson.com. And Olson is olson.com. And the nonprofit is Project Hope Bear, where they can donate a teddy bear to a child who has grown up witnessing domestic violence, and we will be distributing them to all the state coalitions in the country.
How wonderful.
Yeah,
so that's Hope Bear, B-E-A-R.
It's projecthopebear.org.
Projecthopebear.org, and that's
Correct.
B-E-A-R, so that people understand that who are listening.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, we could go on. We could go on for many more hours talking about the nuances of this, but since we have a limited time, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to leave us with your final thoughts, a takeaway on what our listeners should keep in mind when anything related to childhood domestic violence comes up.
Well, that's a great question. And what I want to leave your audience with and your listeners is to really know they are not alone. They are not alone. 1 in 7 adults grow up with this. And there is help available. And there is hope. And you can transform your life and empower others, which is, as we know, the more we help others, the more we help ourselves, and they are not alone. This is widespread, and nobody's talking about it, and there's always hope. There's always hope.
Well, thank you. That's a hopeful and helpful way to end our conversation. I am so grateful to you, Dr. Linda Olson, for all that you were doing. Keep up the wonderful work, and thank you for being a beacon for everyone in this arena. And I want to
thank you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. I want to thank all of you. Go ahead.
For giving me the opportunity, Rosalind, to be able to address this issue. Thank you, and I'm grateful to you to be on the show and all the great work that you do as well.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure, and I am grateful as well. So we will continue to support one another in our work, and I want to thank our listeners for being on the show. And you've been listening to the Going Solo Network, WGSN-DB, and the show is Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living with Rosalind Sedaka. And as you know, I am founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, so you could find all the tips, tools, advice, and programs and coaching services I provide at childcentereddivorce.com. Till next time, this is Rosalind Sedaka. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.
You're listening to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, Singles Talk Radio Channel, where we take a lighthearted and candid approach to discussions on the journey of relationship loss, divorce, parenting, being single, relationships building, dating, and yes, sex. Join our listeners and begin living your best life.